I'd like to start with an overview of the privacy lifecycle for the mDL ecosystem from a provider's point of view to enable each provider to provide reasonable privacy assurances to individuals for the trust that Matt just talked about. So people will be familiar or will have seen this plan, do, check type architecture or continuous improvement lifecycle for privacy. And it provides a full life cycle of privacy assurance. The design element is building mDL readers or mDL software for the context that they will be deployed to. Make sure that you avoid scope creep. The implementation process, put processes in place that deployed readers and mDLs functions as designed. Again, for audit and accountability, the ability for each mDL holder to receive a report on the reader or to issuing authorities so that you can have that kind of accountability. Managing incidents, well, we know that incidents will happen, breaches will happen, and most of the time, most people will forgive organizations or entities that have a breach. What's really determinative in the survivability is how you respond to the breach. So be prepared to learn from them. And finally, learn your lessons and improve your systems so that you can update your design architecture and implement improved processes. Next slide, please. So the architecture, both the ISO standard 8013-5 and the Secure Technology Alliance white paper on this will refer to privacy by design, which has 7 significant principles, which you see on the left of the slide. And the mDL architecture covers those off in a number of different ways that I'd like to talk about. First, a key element of privacy or data protection is to enable user choice. For technologists or policy people on the provider side, this is a matter of security, access control, and so forth and so on. But from the individual's point of view, privacy is really a matter of the ability to choose what information they disclose to whom and for what reason. So it's interesting that this architecture ensures that the person has autonomy and agency. Key privacy by design principles here are the default settings in the system that should be privacy protective options, and that privacy is embedded into the design. The mDL standard includes 3 things that I want to draw your attention to. One is that the transfer of data is initiated by the user. So that's a fundamental part of user choice. The data transfer model is a privacy by default model, and data minimization is followed throughout the life cycle. The key functional requirements vis-a-vis privacy is that the interface between the mDL and the mDL reader shall support the selective release of mDL data. Matt used the example of age verification at a drinking establishment. These days, if you're lucky enough to be in an area of the world that has them open. That's section 6.2 of the standard. Data exchange has 3 phases, starting with an initiation phase that appears to be always initiated by the mDL, which is a privacy positive control in the user's hands. That's 6.3.2.1 in the standard. So the data transfer model presumes user involvement. The transactions are initiated by the mDL holder. Data minimization is enabled in the model. And we talk about biometric templates to ensure that you're not actually storing biometrics in the system. Next slide, please. So how do you fulfill those design goals? The implementation, the challenges, rather I should say, how do you fulfill those design goals? The devil is, of course, in the implementation. Notwithstanding the privacy positive elements that are captured in the design of the mobile driving license ecosystem, jurisdiction implementations need to fulfill the promise of the architecture to deliver privacy and data protection in the context of that jurisdiction. So we talked about user initiation, minimum data transfers and secure transfers. What are the kinds of implementation controls that you can use to make sure that you deliver on those design implementations. One, making sure that your project staff understand the importance of non-functional requirements before go live. It's a leftover from the old days where as long as the system functions, the non-functional requirements can be taken care of later. When you're dealing with personal information like financial information, moving fast and breaking things isn't always the best option, because once you have a privacy breach, there is no putting that milk back in the carton. Making sure that you do assessments during the requirements of the design process, whether you call it a data protection impact assessment or a privacy impact assessment, those two relate to protection of privacy, or a threat risk assessment, or a pen test, or a vulnerability assessment related to security. Make sure that at the various stages of your project, when it's appropriate, if you have gates or checkpoints, that your privacy and security controls are at an adequate point for that point in the project. And finally, making sure that you've got metrics and reporting for the readers, for the holder, and for the regulators and the public. It's trite to say that you can't manage what you can't measure, but it's true. So if you're not, don't build in the metrics that enable you to demonstrate the trust that you're asking for, you're going to have a hard time. Next slide, please. So what's interesting to me when I look at this architecture for interoperability, or the high-level mDL architecture, is how similar it is to other things that are happening in the identity and verification space. If you look on the right, you'll see the issuer, holder, and verifier from verified credentials, which is a W3C. On the bottom right, you'll see the owner, holder, verifier, and issuer, which is from the notion of self-sovereign identity. And what this tells us is that there's a convergence in a high-level architecture, and that interoperability is going to be key. I'm reasonably certain, and I think participants in this call would agree, that as each jurisdiction provides an mDL in its jurisdiction, that will be one kind of verified credential or one kind of identity credential or token that most people are going to have on their devices. But that provides a high level of assurance from a government-issued authority that enables it to be used for other purposes, which creates an opportunity for innovation and market growth for manufacturers and distributors of readers, infrastructures, and the ability of issuing authorities to have dependable reliance on their tokens. So making that interoperable will be key. Next slide, please. So just wrapping up, how do you close the loop to make sure that what you deliver is what you've promised? Transparent operations. We've all heard what's the biggest lie on the internet. Yes, I have read and understood the terms and conditions, yada, yada, yada. So it's not enough to write policies. If you don't close the loop and show holders of mDL why they should continue to trust you, your system will be at risk come the first adverse headline. And this is my mantra when I deal with clients in all kinds of different contexts. If a user is surprised about how their data is being used, that's a privacy fail. And you can't say, well, they shouldn't be surprised because it was written in the privacy policy, because nobody reads privacy policies. It should be inherent and transparent in the operation of the system. So how do you provide that kind of transparency and audibility? Public summaries of PIAs or impact assessments, public summaries of breach reports are critical. If you try and hide that there have been breaches, that doesn't turn out well. Provide user portals or account management for users to be able to see how their data has been used. And as Matt talked about earlier, consider using consent receipts or some other record of transactions so that users have their own reference points to validate that you've done what you're doing. So when you close the loop on privacy, you're also closing the loop on trust to make sure that you build that trusted relationship with your stakeholders.